XDefiant is finally out. We should talk about just the weird amalgam of project goals this thing had. The fact that it was at least more than 3 years in development, but it was announced 3 years ago, middle of the pandemic, 2021, and the reality of this free-to-play COD killer. That the way that it was marketed, the way that it was received. Obviously, you had the beta last year, but the general conversation around XDefiant is like, is this going to kill Call of Duty? Is this the thing that's finally going to make a dent, etc.? I'll be amazed if this thing's still going in a few months.
Can you remember there was a first-person multiplayer game that was free to play on, I think, the PlayStation 4 called, I want to say it was Blacklight something?
Yes.
But this reminds me of that, is what I mean. And I also played that 10 years ago and thought, well, this is good, but I'll just play COD instead.
Blacklight Retribution?
That was it. Yeah. That was it.
There's always like that. Like I said, there's always that attempt to try and knock COD off the top. But it's funny seeing the attempts at it. I just feel like there's the one that I thought was one too far was is Hour of Victory. And I've mentioned it before. It was in like I'll check the year that it came out because it was right in the 2007. It was just after Modern Warfare had blown up and everyone was saying how much they were loving Call of Duty, and then we had this big boom of military shooters. It predates Modern Warfare anyway because you've got Killzone and the brown-gray era. And then Hour of Victory came out, and Hour of Victory's whole thing was that bodies would ragdoll when you blow them up.
Nice.
And I just remember thinking, we've hit the edges. The edges are here and we're bumping up against them. There's nothing else you can advertise this on. And that was like one of the other times that everything maxed out. And like, it's interesting watching. We didn't talk about it just before, but XDefiant is a bad name.
It is.
Like, it's just Call of Duty, Medal of Honor, Overwatch.
To me, it sounds like they wanted to call it just Defiant, but then for CEO purposes in Google searches, they were like, well, that'll bring up so much stuff. Let's whack an X on there and at least we'll be top of the page. It's that kind of cynicism you were talking about earlier where it's like, well, we can't just call it this because it's not optimized in this way to reach X amount of consumers or players or to get this install base. And that puts me off it because other than that, I think it plays well, but it's such a corporate piece and that's not what you want, Scott Tilford.
No.
And things have died for much less than that.
It's very true. Thoughts as we'll get around to various things, but we've both played it.
Yeah, what a fascinating experience this has been from announcement to release. Like you said, it was announced way back when. And I remember when, I think we even covered it, because I thought it initially I was like, what are you doing, Ubisoft? Like, why are you trying to make this COD killer with
doing it again.
All of these different Ubisoft factions that you're plugging in? It looked like a IP masquerade ball of you're going to release a free-to-play thing and try to sell you these other games. But then the tide really shifted, I think. And then when the beta, people got their hands on the beta and the closed tests and people saw more of it, I think people were really looking forward to it. And I feel like the hype at the end of last year was at an all-time high. Like this,
really?
At least in the circles and my algorithms that I follow, which, oftentimes very first-person shooter or multiplayer heavy. Like a lot of the streamers I watched, the YouTube content creators were talking about it. A lot of people online were talking about how much fun they were having and how they wanted this thing to actually launch. And then it kind of went really quiet, and I think people got a bit worried. And now it's finally out, and we all have a chance to play it. And I think it's all right, Scott. I think it's pretty good. I need to clarify that I am very biased when it comes to this stuff because when it comes to XDefiant, I don't know if you would agree. I think if this is one of your first forays into multiplayer games like it, if you haven't played many of the things that it's inspired by, if you are younger than I am or Scott is, I think you'll get more mileage out of it. I personally, so this is why I throw this asterisk up there, I can't escape the fact that for more than half of my life, for 17 years, nearly, I have been playing games where the primary motivation is to upgrade M4 carbines with red dot sights. And there's nothing wrong with that structure, just for me personally.
Even in Black Ops Cold War.
Even in Black Ops Cold War. I have seen versions of this game throughout my entire life, and I've been on this roller coaster ride, and I like it enough, but a game like this is never going to get me in by the scruff of my neck and make me want to play it non-stop, so that is an important caveat. However, everything that is in the game, I think is probably as good as it could have been. I do think it's really solid. I do think it's visually quite spectacular. I was surprised with how good aesthetically it was, just in terms of the visuals and the colors and stuff like that. I think the factions are cool, and we'll dig into this more deeper soon. And the gunplay, I think, is as solid as a non-COD game can be. It is satisfying, it is snappy, it is responsive. There's so much more to talk about, but I think for a free-to-play Ubisoft game, it's way better than I thought it was going to be. It's just, I personally have that disconnect because I'm like, no man, another suppressor for an M4. How many suppressors for M4s have I unlocked in my life?
They do, that's the thing. They're leaning on the, hey, Call of Duty, here's our kind of version of that, but then various different tweaks. There's a few things I want to touch on. One being that a lot of the discourse around this is that it's everything Call of Duty isn't, i.e. it doesn't have skill-based matchmaking, which has become this big lightning rod conversation. It has been for years in Call of Duty circles, but I don't know if you can explain that a little bit and how like this doesn't have it.
Yeah, so Call of Duty, to a certain degree, has always had this thing called skill-based matchmaking or score-based matchmaking, whatever you want to call it, which essentially is like a playlist algorithm that tries to constantly match you with players of the same skill level or maybe a bit more. And while on paper that sounds like fair, it sounds like something you would want in a game like Call of Duty, where you want it to remain competitive. You don't want to have lobbies that are entirely one-sided and are just not fun to play. It's become so aggressive in recent years that it has kind of made it not fun, because you can see the algorithm almost when you're playing a game. If you do well in a few matches, you kind of, at least I do, and I know a lot of people on like the subreddits do, you have this sort of worry in the back of your mind because you're going to get punished for it. You know what I mean? Like you'd get top of the leaderboard for a few games in a row, and the next one you're going to get put in with people who are a higher skill level than you, and you're going to have a bad time. You're going to be getting shot from all over the place. You're going to be playing with sweats who have hand configurations that I didn't even know was humanly possible, and you're going to get annihilated. And that's been in the multiplayer, it's been in Warzone itself. And it's just made for a strange experience, especially because, and this is the big bugbear, is that until very, very recently, Call of Duty has not had a ranked player list that is distinguishable from a casual player list.
Right.
So I think a lot of people are accepting of score-based matchmaking or SBMM in ranked player lists because it makes sense. You of course are going to be matched with people of your skill level to hopefully get better and get up those ranks. But a lot of people just want to jump in casually on COD and not have to worry about that stuff and not have to sweat it out like that and jump in a casual playlist. But those have been amalgamated with XDefiant. The promise is finally separating those two things. So as far as I'm aware, there is no SBMM in the casual playlist, but you do have a ranked mode. I've just been in the casual playlist so far. Yeah, and while there, of course, is some algorithm or setup with the playlist that keeps teams balanced, it doesn't feel as aggressive as a Call of Duty. So you can, in my experience, I've jumped in and like got 4 deaths and 30 kills in one game, and then jumped in one that was tighter, maybe 16 for 16. And I think for me personally, it's worked out well for the game and is on paper what a lot of the hardcore multiplayer community has been wanting. I don't worry about it, but I'm interested in its longevity because it's cool right now when everyone is playing, but what happens in a few months when you do only have that kind of more hardcore pool anyway? And I also wonder about team balancing because a lot of the game modes in this are, relatively hardcore objective based for the kind of game this is. Like it starts you off on Escort, which if you've played Overwatch or Team Fortress, I think it's Team Fortress, I'm getting very old. It's just when you have to, one team has to get close to a vehicle and then it will move a little bit and the goal is to get it to the enemy's base.
When it was one of them.
Yeah, and if you're on the other side, you have to defend it and kind of push them back, which has kind of become, I think, the standard game mode for multiplayer games now. Like it used to be Team Deathmatch or Deathmatch, and now it's that Escort mission, which I like, but it's, you play it and you're like, okay, here are like the sort of basics that you would expect. They're done pretty well. But I don't know if SBMM means anything to you, because with XDefiant, sorry, I've been rambling so much. But what's fascinated me into the run up to it is, like Call of Duty Modern Warfare 3, it seems hyper-focused on answering the issues and critiques raised by in the grand scheme of things, minority of hardcore players. Like, I don't know if the casual COD fan would know what SBMM is. They're probably aware of it in some form, but like, you're not selling a game based on the fact that that isn't in there.
No.
Whereas Modern Warfare 3 was really focused on those hardcore features that only people in the community would really care about, like slide canceling and stuff like that, you know, kind of answering the vocal people online. And XDefiant seems to be really going all in on that gambit as a marketing technique. And I'm just interested in how that works out on a financial or critical wavelength, because I wonder what that community translates to numbers wise, and whether hyper focusing on that kind of online community or streaming culture will work for a game like this that's trying to get everyone in. I don't know. I think it's an interesting question.
The thing is, like, in the run-up, when XDefiant got announced, it was a laughing stock, because it was just like, this just feels like Ubisoft took. And the thing is, like, it's the word ambitious, like, it feels like a hell of a team meeting inside Ubisoft, where it's okay, what IPs have we got? Far Cry, The Division, Ghost Recon, Splinter Cell, which hasn't had an installment in 11 years, and Watch Dogs and Watch Dogs 2. Let's mesh that all together and Smash Brothers it, and try and have this character roster where we're taking different characters from these different IP, and not only will we have this incredible roster of characters, but we'll be announcing each franchise inside XDefiant in itself. And you can see all the business minds like cheering and whooping in the business meeting, going, that's genius, that's brilliant. But at the time when it got announced, it was like, well, no one cares about the cleaners from The Division. No one cares about, some random faction from Far Cry 6. And I still don't think people do. And I think that veneer of Ubisoftness is an interesting gamble.
Yes.
And like I said, the words like ambitious, or the things like the aspects of it that can be celebrated, are strictly through the lens of, this works entirely for Ubisoft. This is like Ubisoft being a Nintendo. And it's interesting, like Sony tried it years ago when they did the All-Star Battle Royale, and it was like, it's the Killzone guy. And it's like, this doesn't really work in the same way. But XDefiant's general presentation and all this, like all the stuff that they've got in regards to targeting the hardcore, is paired up against this super attempt at super appealing to the mainstream and being super casual and just trying to hook in all these different people. And when you said that you think like it looks really gorgeous, it looks really good, like color-wise, whatever, I almost had the opposite, where I was like, this looks AI generated. This looks like it's a gumbo of everything. You've just sort of melting potted everything together. And every single feature feels audience tested to death, where it's the safest AAA game you could possibly make. And some people might like that. I do think it's interesting that it's #1 trending right now on PlayStation and Xbox, which is cool. And we'll get back to some of the facets as to why. But to me, it's like, it's a corporate training video as a video game. Like it's very just, we have these 5 points, let's mesh them together. That's our video game. It doesn't feel like there's an original thought in there at all, really.
No.
And the gameplay can still come through, it can still work, but it does feel like this target demographic thing brought to life.
I'm absolutely with you, man. That is why I think partly why I can't love it in the way that I maybe would if it was an original idea, because like you said, everything in this game, even though it plays well, has been, you can tell it's been through like 10 layers of executive acceptance, and they've pointed towards other models that have done well, or other features that have done well in other games, and they've gone, right, give us our version of it. Just going back to what you said about like the Ubisoftification of the presentation, I think that is a fascinating conversation to have, because they've tried to do this a few times now. I can't remember the exact game that was the first to do it, but it was another multiplayer title where you had all of these different factions in, and you had the third, what are they called in there? Splinter Cell? What's the faction called?
There's a few, it's like third echelon, fourth echelon is the main one. Whatever.
Yeah, the echelon boys. You had those in there. You had like the Far Cry people. You had the Division people. And like you, I don't think that that well of IPs, as much as I really like them, is as strong as Ubisoft wants it to be. No. Like, I don't think anyone's going there and being buzzing that you can play it as someone from Far Cry 6.
Or a DedSec member from Watch Dogs.
Well, some of them, I'm like, yeah, I can go for that. Like, I think the character I'm playing as, or the operator that I'm maining, is someone from the Splinter Cell faction.
Same.
It's one of the female characters, and it's a cool design. She looks mint. I mean, I love the Splinter Cell aesthetic. Her special is to essentially give her like a little mini radar that highlights people across through walls and stuff, which has been very handy for the objective game mode. So
the one where you get Sam Fisher's pistol.
Yeah.
I laughed at that, but I was like, oh, like, just put Fisher in the game. But still.
See, it's stuff like that where I'm like, some of this is really strong. And I guess if you love the Ubisoft entire back catalog, you'll have a whale of a time. But again, anecdotally and, you know, maybe a little bit jokingly, I've never met an Ubisoft head to that degree. I've known people like yourself and I who will maybe gravitate towards a certain series or a faction in this case, but as a whole breadth of, you know, customization and character selections, I'm like, all right, there's so many of you that I can ignore, and I don't. It makes me, I think because it's a free-to-play game and they're relying on people getting the battle pass, it makes me not want to get the battle pass because I don't care about those factions. I don't care about those characters. I care about some of them, but not in a way that makes me want to go all in on this kind of presentation. And it does feel, like you said, to just be an amalgamation of everything Ubisoft has in its toy box, and also all these features from other successful online games that we're going to bring in, right down to the progression of the weapons, right down to the skills that each operator has, to the map design in some cases, and to the game modes especially.
We'll come back around to the roster and the characters and the abilities and stuff. I want to talk about the free-to-play side of it, because I think if you go wider in terms of where Call of Duty's are, to me, as someone who has played every single Call of Duty apart from Modern Warfare 3, both times, hilariously, just because when Modern Warfare 3 dropped last year, I just didn't have the file size for it. And I still don't, because that game is stupidly big. But the free-to-play side of it, I feel like is an interesting angle for a game this well made, because I wonder, I wax and wane on where Call of Duty's reputation is at. It's this de facto big seller. Modern Warfare 3 has been in the top 10 since it launched, but there is that conversation around okay, but if there was something else, there's always a place in media for the challenger brand, and it's interesting. I was looking at Splitgate, because that was another game across the last few years that was like, oh my god, it's so tight, it's really unique. Not that was a COD killer, or even anything close, but Splitgate had the buzz and then it died. And XDefiant right now has the buzz, and the free-to-play thing is clearly what's getting people in. But also alongside the file size, I wanted to mention that. XDefiant's file size is 30 gig.
Yeah.
That's way more manageable than the couple hundred gig you need to install Call of Duty before you even get lost in all the compatibility packs and splitting single player, multiplayer, whatever. To me, it's a living hell trying to install Call of Duty. All I wanted to do the other week was just install Call of Duty and just play some multiplayer matches. And could I get that to work without cleaning my entire PS5 out? And even then, when I got the games installed, it had to do updates, which meant all the file sizes needed to be have space for duplicates, which was then ludicrous. It was 320 gig.
Yes.
And I was like, well, no.
It's crazy.
At some point, I'll just give up. And I did. And so I think the free-to-play stuff is interesting because it just doesn't have that premium price point, which is a whole thing in the wider context, because Xbox are about to do Call of Duty on Game Pass and try and get you across that way. But then the file size is a thing, but just overall, you have a free-to-play Call of Duty that plays close enough. It's just that it fundamentally hinges on how much you care about Ubisoft's aesthetic to keep you around. And when it comes to battle passes, because there's monetization in this, but it's cosmetic. There's not pay to win stuff, at least so far. So you're hinging a lot of that big return on investment on, do you want a new mask for your Watch Dogs, man?
Yeah.
Etc.
Yeah, it's I'm really going to be interested in its longevity, because like you said, you have to be invested, I think, in those Ubisoft characters or the presentation to want to buy into the battle pass. But also, I've only dabbled a little bit. I can't say I've played tens and tens of hours of this game. I absolutely have not. But from the the taste of the progression that I've had so far in leveling up my weapons and stuff, that's not, again, it's not going to cut it for me personally. And I don't know whether that's because it is basic in and of itself, or whether I've just experienced it too many times, but I don't find the rate of progression that satisfying in what you're unlocking and the weapon builds. It's just standard stuff, and that might be fine for something like this, especially something that's free to play, but it doesn't make me want to play it over something like COD or whatever. It really reminds me of I think the shooting is really good, and like I said at the start, I think it's as close to COD as you're going to get from a non-COD developer, unless you're what they called Respawn Entertainment, who had COD developers on that team. To me, it plays like, and this is not a knock, it plays like, in a way, Crysis 2's multiplayer. And also the Medal of Honor games that DICE did the multiplayer
for. The 2009 one?
Yes, the reboot ones, which kind of were it was like a Battlefield-style combat, but in a smaller space and with focus on team deathmatch, which is to say that it feels good. It feels solid, but it's not the elements that this game has, unless you're really sick of COD, unless you really can't stand it, or like I said, if this is your entry point into this style of game, like, I don't know if it has what it takes to survive in the long term. I kind of hope it does. I hope it does give us reasons to come back. And it's as good of a free-to-play experience that I think has come out in a while.
Yes.
You know, I've not seen something with this much promise, mostly because the other free-to-play games I've been jumping on have been Foam Stars, which had no promise.
Put Foam Stars down, Josh.
I know, sorry. I was the escort missions again. I had to do them. All this to say, I hope it does well, Scott. I do genuinely believe that, because I think Call of Duty and other multiplayer games need some competition, and I do think it has fallen in a pretty good window. We're enough removed from Modern Warfare 3 that people have really started to sour on that game and are starting to get bored with it. Yet we're far enough out from the actual release of Black Ops 6 that you're not going toe-to-toe with it. You are going toe-to-toe with the announcement, but I think being free-to-play definitely helps, and not being tied to another paid experience will get more people in. I think it's going to be huge right now. I just wonder about if we'll be talking about it in 6 months' time.
The big question for me is I always think executives don't underestimate audiences and don't think the average gamer, the average player, the average consumer can tell the disparate parts they're pulling from to stitch together to make the game. This is so nakedly Overwatch meets Call of Duty. Like, you have the hero powers, you have the general way that they activate, like some people's powers, like the Splinter Cell person. That's a vision mode with a one-hit kill or a couple of hit kill pistol, which is very like McCree's special in Overwatch, or Soldier 76's special in Overwatch, which was in 2016. And a lot of people played a lot of that, and even Overwatch 2 couldn't keep going with Overwatch's momentum. And then you've got the Call of Duty stuff where it's like, well, we should have these builds because people like builds. Call of Duty, we need to sell you different stuff, different skins for the builds. We should have that. And it's almost the first of its kind that is perfectly meshing those two identities. However, they were different for a reason.
Yes.
And it's interesting bringing that sort of stuff together. It's why I mentioned it feeling AI generated, or it feels like this arbitrary thing where you can see the business minds going like, Call of Duty, Overwatch, what if we, And then this becomes that game. And it plays well enough. It's focus tested. They've got enough money to throw at it. And God knows they really want a live service success, as all third-party developers do right now.
Yes.
Or all studios, rather, publishers do. And so you just, to me, you see the stitches, you see it being held together, you see how it's being held together. And I think it would have been stronger if it was just its own IP. Like it is its own IP. It's called XDefiant, but it's made up of Ubisoft stuff, to the point where they are advertising the games inside them. Like, it's like, hey, this is Far Cry 6 logo, Ghost Recon Phantoms, 2014's just remind it, because it just said Ghost Recon, Splinter Cell, because they haven't got a new Splinter Cell, so it just says Splinter Cell. Things like that. Watch Dogs 2, when you're hovering over different characters, like it's a brand game.
Yes.
And you can argue something like Smash Brothers is as well, fair enough. But I feel like that's done it a lot more elegantly, or it's done it for so long. It was the first of its kind. It iterated so well over time. I feel like this would have been better if it had, if it was its own thing, and then you had characters guests from different IP. Then you brought Sam Fisher in, or Dude with Beard from Ghost Recon Breakpoint, or whatever you want to do.
Yeah. Hey, I think you're right. I think, they've almost done and bear with me again, the DCEU mistake of just being like, right, just get everyone together and we'll just kick it off from there. Whereas the beauty, in my opinion, of getting people like Sam Fisher in the Ghost Recon game or Rainbow Six is that you've already established your game first. I know they're both long-running franchises, but Siege was its own thing with its own operators before it started having guests. Ghost Recon had its main characters before it added other Ubisoft crossovers and DLC and stuff. Aiden Pierce from Watch Dogs making appearances and stuff like that. Whereas this is like, actually, we'll skip establishing what XDefiant is, because all XDefiant is Ubisoft as a whole.
Yes.
And that might work for them. But I think it needs something else, because like you said, if this game came out in 2020, for instance, I think even then people would be saying, oh, we can see the stitches, we see what you're pulling from. To me, I don't know whether it's a me thing. I don't know whether everyone listening to this or watching this is oversaturated as well. But yeah, in 2024, you can see what they're pulling from, and it's almost like I've had this version of COD before.
Yes.
Black Ops 4, for instance, already tried to become at least in part, a hero shooter.
I forgot that even existed. That's exactly what this is.
And become influenced by Overwatch. We've seen COD dabble in that, so it's not even like this is providing something new. This is providing something that COD tried about 7 years ago, and we were like, I'm not sure if this works. So
to that end as well,
feel a bit late to the party.
Massively. There's that whole idea of Call of Duty losing its identity at the minute, like that idea, like the Gundam skins, King Kong Godzilla skins, Kim Kardashian, Nicki Minaj. She could be in there.
King Kong probably is in there as well.
I have no idea, but Nicki Minaj skins, there's that whole idea of like, where is the gritty, boots on the ground or military style shooter? And something like Hell Let Loose has been able to get a bit of purchase in that regard.
Yeah.
And then you've got XDefiant comes along and doesn't have an identity, is this amalgam of everything that you've seen before, and is then unable to say, hey, it's okay over here because we're doing the same thing. We're reminding you of all these other brands. We have no core identity. We just have the amalgam stitched together, holding things together. It's a weird beat. And you can, like I said, you can see the marketing departments, you can see the PR win, you can see the business directives guiding this thing. But I think the average person is repelled by that stuff. So I think they'll give it a shot because it's free to play. But I'll be amazed if it actually sticks around long term.
Yeah, 100%. I'm interested to see whether, for the hardcore fans who have been screaming for this type of gameplay, I wonder if that's enough to make them have a good time. And if so, I'm absolutely all for that. But on a wider sort of scope, is this going to get in, Johnny Casual who buys Call of Duty every year and likes it? Is this going to turn his head? Is this going to make him realize this is what he's been missing from Call of Duty or the first-person shooter games in the market? I'm with you. I'm not sure if I have that element of penetration, but perhaps.